Hey, welcome to the Upland Nation podcast. I'm Scott Linden, your host. As we reminisce, go back, get a little nostalgic about the past season. Two great guests who speak to the issue and are good friends of mine. You will enjoy both of them as we get started this week, as well as the debrief on their seasons and a few tips and tricks, hints and hacks, as well as some observations about bird populations and tactics and strategies. We'll have our Fix It segment. We'll talk about foot care in the wintertime, just a little bit. And the word of the week for our Fur Feathers Friends Pointer Shotgun giveaway comes in this week. This week, your prize is a Pike Gear Dakota pant worth $230. And finally, I asked everybody, since I won't be able to talk to you all on the podcast, asked everybody in the newsletter how their season went. So we'll take a look at the numbers there. It's all coming up right here on the Upland Nation podcast, made possible by Pointer Shotguns, Mid-Valley Clays and Shooting School, Trulock Choke Tubes, MidwayUSA.com, and Purina Pro Plan Sport Dog Food. Well, this is my first chance to thank the Port Van Pointing Dog Club for having me up to talk about public access and maybe get a few more people taking a few more trips and bringing along a friend or a newbie. It was a lot of fun at the Wendell Museum of Animal Conservation. If you're ever in Vancouver, Washington, make sure and try and get a look at that place. Pretty spectacular. Saw some old friends, made some new friends, and hopefully it helped out a little bit in that regard. Thank you so much for having me, everybody, at the Port Van Pointing Dog Club. What's going on around here? Well, back in the rodeo business, when I was doing that kind of stuff, we had a phrase, we called it the Cowboy Christmas, because it was in July. That's when all the big money rodeos took place, and you could really make a pile if you knew what you were doing with a rope or a saddle. Same thing happens in the magazine business. I'm learning slowly but surely. You sit around in January twiddling your thumbs, and then all the assignments come in February. I'm not complaining. I'm just saying it is just like the old days, except you don't get broken up as much. Thank you to all the magazines I work with, and watch for some bylines in the next few months. Some fresh ones, and then a brand new magazine from the United Kennel Club and the American Field folks. So we'll be doing some work in that as well. I asked on the newsletter how your season went, gave you 3 choices. From the bottom to the top, 25% of you didn't have much of a season. You called it, the choice was dismal. When's the next season opener? 25% of you. Oh, man, I'm sorry to hear that. But there's always next year, as they say, hope springs eternal. Average, nothing to write home about, 52% of you. And I guess we can't complain. As you noted, it could be a lot worse. And then finally, and I'm in that crowd, about 23% of us said it was an epic season, one for the record books. We all have different ways to define that. With me, it was incredible weather, just sheer luck in many cases. And then some pretty good bird populations. And as I might have mentioned once or twice, we all came out of it uninjured, which is a marked change from some of the past. In fact, I'll be asking about that in the next newsletter. So if you haven't opened it yet, take a look and let us know. This kind of stuff, I share it with people throughout the industry, and they're always kind of surprised at what's happening in the real world. And that's what I love most about it, is finding out how everybody is doing right there on the ground. So thank you for your responses on that. And that portion of the show is brought to you by Mid-Valley Clays and Shooting School. These are hunters. In fact, I saw Dave and Vandy at the speech I gave last week. Appreciate that. And Lauded them for their wonderful insights into my bad shooting. In addition to instruction, which is high on my list this time of year, they have always got small gauge guns in stock. And Dave has volunteered for my listeners to take your calls no matter what point you're at in the gun shopping process. In fact, the earlier the better as far as we're concerned. That way he can get you steered in the right direction in terms of the gauge, the configuration, over and under, side by side, semi-auto, whatever. And then also he's got a line on some of those hard-to-find guns. So look him up at midvalleyclays.com, midvalleyclays.com. I talked a lot this season, and it's still mind-blowing to me how good a shape Flick came out of this hunting season. In large part, I think it's because we feed Pro Plan Sport Performance Formula from Purina. They're available for all stages of your hunting dog's life. So no matter where you are as a hunting team, there's something for your dog in their product line. Just to give you that perfect example, Flick went into the season at about 60 pounds. Yeah, it went up, it went down a little, it went up a little bit down. But when we were last at the veterinarian, and it was only a couple weeks ago, he weighed 60.2 pounds. That's what a high-protein formula with real meat as the first ingredient will do for your dog. It's nutrient-dense, and they love the taste. Learn more at ProPlansport.com. That's ProPlansport.com. Well, all we get to do is pass like ships in the night at Pheasant Fest. This is my first chance in a long time to get caught up with my friend Jim Millensifer, who brought me and my crew there to do some TV work during the Governor's Invitational Pheasant Hunt a while back. It is one of those bucket list Kansas experiences that, Jim, you need a gold medal and a blue ribbon for that effort there. Tell us more about that to start with. Welcome to the program, Jim Millensifer.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate it. So I'll be brief. The Governor's Hunt is an event that started in 2011. Sam Brownback was the governor at that point in time, and his effort was to promote hunting tourism in the state. And so that's what the first hunt was for in 2011. We quickly learned in the next 2 or 3 years that we hosted the event that supporting hunting tourism was good, but if we were going to be able to gather long-term sponsorship opportunities, our sponsors were more concerned about what we were doing to promote the sport and new folks into the sport and just to promote hunting and the shooting sports. So we changed our emphasis from just promoting hunting tourism in Northwest Kansas to trying to get new people involved in the sport and promote new hunters and new shooters. And we've been very, very successful. This will be our 15th year coming up next November. Over the last 14 years, we've raised close to $1 million that's gone to support wildlife conservation and habitat efforts, and also get new folks involved in shooting sports. So it's been pretty successful, and we're excited looking at year 15.
Well, I'll tell you, you guys sure turned us on to Northwest Kansas. I've been back probably 5 or 7 times since then, whether it's to make shows or just have fun out there. Good for you, and looking forward to hearing more great news from your organization and how that's going. And yourself, you are, number one, I feel a little bit of kinship to you because you have slightly ugly dogs as well most of the time. But tell me a little bit about yourself and your hunting activities and what kind of dogs you have.
So this will be my 51st year next fall. We're still hunting a little bit here in February, and this was my 50th season. I started hunting when I was 15 years old, and I'm old. I'm 65 now, but have been hunting upland birds for the majority of that period of time. I did some big game hunting, but I really, really enjoy hunting with my dogs, pointers. I have German wire-haired pointers. I've got 3 dogs that I hunt with today, and since 1994, I've had 8 wire hairs. So I really enjoy pointing dogs, and we hunt everything from grouse in the forest to this week we're heading down to New Mexico tomorrow to finish out the season down in New Mexico hunting scaled quail. So my dogs hunt 13 or 14 different species every year from North Dakota to Arizona and all the states in between.
Well, that's why I thought we would, everybody would enjoy you and I talking a little bit. You do cover a lot of ground, and it's hard to do for a lot of people. We've all got an excuse. I gave a speech last Saturday night, and the goal of the speech they wanted me to talk about was encouraging all their members to travel a little bit more for their hunting. What would you tell somebody who's maybe a little bit leery of going to a new state or even across the state to a new place?
Well, I think that we're fortunate. You're up in the Idaho or Oregon area. I'm in western Kansas, but I travel, like I said, between North Dakota and Arizona and all in between. We're very, very fortunate in the West because there's such tremendous public access virtually in all of those states, whether it's BLM, National Forest, or any of the state programs where they incentivize private landowners to allow hunters access. So there's tremendous, walk-in opportunities for all of us on public access land. So if you just do a little bit of research ahead of time, you can certainly learn about the different opportunities. And frankly, the days of there being secrets are long gone, whether it's on X or social media itself. There's so much conversations about the different opportunities that exist. There's really no longer any secrets, whether it's eastern Montana or any of these other, Mearns quail down along the Mexican border in Arizona. There's so much communication and conversation about the opportunities that if you just do a little bit of research, you can certainly learn about the different species and all the public access. I think I think living in the West, we're very, very fortunate to have that opportunity.
Yeah, and that was kind of the gist of what I wanted to outline Saturday night, and you've done a great job of applying that in a more practical manner. So you mentioned so many bird species that most of us never touch on. Why don't you just give us a quick list of some of the less common bird species that you've hunted in the last 50 years?
Well, several years ago, back in 2013, I did what was called, I called it the Great Chicken Chase. And between Colorado, Wyoming, and Kansas, I shot 8 different species of grouse from ptarmigan in the above timberline in Colorado. In those days, we could still hunt both lesser and greater prairie chickens in Kansas.
Yeah.
Rough grouse in Wyoming, dusky or blue grouse in Colorado and Wyoming, beige grouse, sharp-tailed grouse, Colombian sharp-tailed grouse. Not a lot of people hunt sharp-tailed grouse in the mountains, but whether it's Colorado, Idaho, mountain sharp-tailed grouse are just a great species to hunt. I love. They're all chickens to me. If it's a grouse, it's a chicken. So it's either a tundra chicken or a blue chicken or a rough chicken. But I love hunting grouse. And the thing about grouse is the seasons in these states, Colorado, Wyoming, Nebraska, you can start hunting the prairie grouse or the forest grouse as early as September 1st.
Yeah.
So to me, that's the nicest part about it is if you are an upland enthusiast and you want to get your dogs out, you can start hunting as early as September 1st. And I tell my friends, September and October is for getting into shape. That's when I really get into shape is hunting in the because you put in a lot of effort when you're hunting prairie grouse or forest grouse. You might walk 8 or 10 miles a day, maybe even more. So lots of good exercise in those months, and then frankly we finish it out hunting quail all the way into February. You can hunt New Mexico. Arizona just closed last Sunday, I believe it was. Mm-hmm. So you can hunt Mearns quail and gambles and scaled quail down in Arizona. I'm heading to New Mexico tomorrow. We'll hunt some scaled quail for the last 4 days of the season. So whether it's bob whites or merns or scales or any of the type gambles, any of the type of the desert quail or quail that are in these states, you can hunt all the way into February. So I embrace all of those, and frankly, even then you get into October, late September, October, and being able to hunt Hungarian partridge or chucker partridge is a treat as well. So if you start early and end late, you have the opportunity to hunt lots of species.
Well, I think that ought to be the framed saying over everybody's desk these days: start early and hunt late. Of all of those, is there something in particular about one of those species that you would want to share with us that may be a little bit unusual, challenging, or eye-opening to you?
I get asked a lot what's my favorite species to hunt, and the simple answer for me is whatever I'm hunting tomorrow.
Yeah.
So scaled quail are going to be my favorite thing to hunt the rest of this week. But really, for me, anything that my dogs can point is a treasure. If it weren't for the dogs, I don't think I would do it. I don't even enjoy it if I have to rest my dogs and I'm hunting and there's other folks and other dogs involved. If my dogs aren't on the ground, I don't even enjoy that as much. So really anything that I'm hunting with my dogs is my favorite, at least for that day. But yeah, I think that, whitetail ptarmigan in the high country of Colorado or Nevada, in Colorado or Utah, is something that not a lot of people hunt. I've hunted the snowcock in the mountains above Elko, which was very, very cool. So the challenging part about those birds is you're at altitude. You're at 12, 13, 14,000 feet in elevation. So that can be very, very challenging. I love the prairie grouse, but again, you might walk 12 or 13, 14 miles in a day to find prairie chickens or sharp-tailed grouse. But that's always fun and encouraging. So yeah, I really, whatever I'm hunting, and I grew up hunting pheasants. So the cackling rooster getting up that's been pointed and flying away from you, I don't think I'll ever get past that. That's my drug of choice is flushing a cackling rooster.
Wow. The hair is standing up on the back of my neck talking about all of those, and I'm jealous, of course, because you get to go one more time. You're listening to the Upland Nation podcast, everybody. That's Jim Millensifer. I'm Scott Linden. Jim, just because everybody kind of, even if they never admit it, in the back of their minds, they think they might do a Himalayan snowcock hunt. I had the chance once. The timing wasn't right. We never pulled it together, but it's a way different way of hunting. Describe your snowcock hunt and how that works.
Well, 4, 5, 6 years ago, there was lots of information on social media and YouTube, and lots of people were doing it. In fact, the first year that we did it, there were probably 8 or 10 other camps in that general area where we were, in the Rubies there, south of Elko. So it was pretty crowded. I'm assuming that it's lessened up than that. I didn't take the dogs, and I didn't enjoy it as much because of that. But the terrain that you're hunting and the climbing that you have to do, and it's just really not conducive to having dogs.
Yeah.
My dogs. So it was a challenge. It was a big, from a cardiovascular standpoint. The first year we hunted, we only hiked in about 2.5 miles and set up a camp. So that wasn't tough. But then for 4 or 5 days, we hunted pretty hard and hiked quite a bit each of those days. The second time I went, we actually backpacked in about 7 miles and set up a camp and then hunted from there. So it's definitely a challenge. Like I said earlier, I'm 65. I was hunting with some guys that are even 2 or 3 years older than I was. And this was 2018, 2019, 2020 is when we did that.
Yeah.
So it was 5 or 6 years ago, but still, if you're pushing 60 years old, it's definitely a challenge.
Yeah, all you chucker hunters who really think you're good at that maybe want to try a snowcock someday. I remember talking with, at the time, there was an outfitter who would actually do that with us, and he did mountain lions most of the year, but he would put you on a horse and bring a mule, pack mule or two up there, and he said, well, we go up to about 10,000 feet with the horses, then we tie them off and we climb another 2,000 feet. And I thought, well, that would be an adventure. I don't know if I can get 2 TV crew guys up there with me, but it might be worth. Like I said, it never pulled itself together for what it was worth.
You know, it is an interesting activity. The birds, they live at the top of the rock outcroppings, and they fly down. So they'll drop in elevation, 500 or 1,000 feet or more, and then they slowly climb their way back up during the course of the day, eating as they go back up. So your opportunities are either to spot birds at daybreak, or position yourself in a place where they come across you as they're walking back up, kind of like hiding for elk or other big game, or frankly, just trying to traverse through the different crevasses and rock outcroppings and so forth, and sneak up on one as you come over a little bit of a ridge. But they're incredibly fast. If you see one, you'll be sitting on the rock outcropping and the bird will flush from the top, and it's like a jet fighter flying through the air, incredibly fast. They can fly in excess of 100 miles an hour. So it's something to do. Definitely, if you're a bucket list type of guy, Himalayan snowcock is a terrific thing to do at least once.
Well, but as you say, the joy of this game for most of us is following a dog or 2 or 3 or more, and you did a lot of that this season as well. Do you have a highlight for the season? Where were you, and what were you hunting for?
North Dakota was amazing this year. We had a really, really good hunt in October, and then I went back in right before Christmas, and that was a little bit more challenging because of the weather. But yeah. North Dakota was very, very good this year. I hunt southwest North Dakota, and the Hungarian partridge were terrific this year. Really, really good year for chickens up there. The sharp-tail were tremendous this year, and pheasants are always good. Even in the down year in North Dakota, a bad year for North Dakota just means you have to hunt all day to get your limit of 3. A good time in North Dakota, you might be done hunting pheasants by 8:30 or 9 o'clock in the morning, and you're looking for chickens or partridge. But North Dakota was terrific this year. Arizona was very, very tough. I hunted 5 hard days and shot 9 quail in 5 days down there. It was very, very tough. Both the desert quail, the gambles and the scale quail were tough, and it was one of the toughest year for Mearns quail. I was fortunate enough to bag all 3 species, but hunted pretty hard and wasn't very successful. The flip side of that is quail in western Kansas this year, northwestern, north central, and southwestern Kansas. Quail were off the charts this year. I had been on my best bobwhite quail hunting years in Kansas that I've ever had, let alone the last 10 or 12 years. So the quail were very, very good to me in Kansas, but not so much down in Arizona. I haven't hunted New Mexico yet, so I'm looking forward to seeing that later this week.
Oh, yeah, we'll trade notes after that trip. You bring up an interesting point, though, when you when you compare and contrast your quail hunting in Kansas with the quail hunting you've already had in Arizona. Can you attribute the down side in Arizona to anything in particular? Were people talking about rainfall at the wrong time, or no rainfall, or too much, or was there anything else that you heard about?
Yeah, I'm certainly not a biologist. I'm just an old fry cook, but they had good rain in Arizona, but it wasn't necessarily at the right time. That's what I've heard from talking to people that are knowledgeable. So they get the rains in February, March, and it brings the greens, and that's what the desert quail need to start the process where they're going to mate and raise young ones. And if they don't get the rains and the greens don't come, then they don't want to do that activity. So I think they had pretty good rains, but it was just spotty and it didn't necessarily come at the right time.
Yeah.
So habitat was great, which indicates that they had moisture. But it just, my understanding is it just didn't come at the right time.
Yeah. You bring up an interesting point. I've not heard a lot of discussion about, and just to put a capper on it. We always think about rain as rain grows bugs, and then the chicks get the bugs. But it's got to grow those greens for the adults before it can do that, and that's it's like two windows of risk for a quail population.
Yeah, I was not familiar with it, but we ran across a game warden a couple of years ago. Well, 5 or 6 years ago down in Arizona. I was there the last week of the season, so about this week or just before it, a few years ago, and ran across a wildlife officer. And that's where I really learned that the grass that they get in February and March brings the greens, and they start eating that, and that's what really triggers the reproductive process.
Yeah.
If they don't get the greens then they just don't, they don't reproduce. They don't, or they'll start later, and then of course that maybe hampers the success rate. So I certainly believe, based on the habitat that we saw, that they had good moisture, whether it was down along the border and hunting Murren's quail, or whether it was closer up there to Interstate 10, where we hunt typically the scaled quail and the gambles. But the habitat was good, but apparently it just came at the wrong time. Yeah. And frankly, there's a lot of pressure now in Arizona.
Yeah.
That's an area that's become more and more popular, and so and all that does mean that you've got to hunt harder. But even a tough week is better than nothing.
Yeah, especially later in the season. I can't agree more. If you, how'd the dogs do? I mean, did they come out of the season in good shape? Were they? Did you have any issues?
If you've got dogs, you're having injuries is a fact of life. But yeah. I was very, very fortunate this year. Didn't have any major issues. Didn't have to have any visits to the vet. Year before, up in North Dakota, I had a tough deal, but dogs came through good. It was the cactus in Nebraska was very, very tough this year. So when we were hunting prairie chickens, sharp-tailed grouse, it was a struggle. I don't boot my dogs. Lots of people do, but I don't boot my dogs. So the little ball cactus in Nebraska was tough this year. So that was a challenge for us. We normally hunt at least once or twice down near the Texas-New Mexico border, and I did not get down there this year. I'm going to be down there, not in that same general area. I'm going to be closer to Tucumcari this week. But you get over near the Texas border, I heard that the grassy sandbirds were really, really tough this year. So
wow,
I was fortunate, didn't have any injuries, didn't have any too much automotive problems traveling, which is always an issue. But it was. Overall, it was a very, very good season from that standpoint.
I'm sorry. I tried to be quiet about it, but the entire time you were describing all of that, I was knocking wood, because I just earlier in the podcast had talked about how lucky we had been, just me and my one dog. But speaking of dogs, is there one, or describe your highlight reel of dog work for this season?
So I have a dog that's going to be 9 in May, and I have a dog that turned 6 in January, and a dog that turned 5 in January. And my oldest dog, Birdy, who was given to me by a close friend a couple of years ago, he kind of changed his tune and went to English setters and bigger running dogs and got out of the wire hair business, if you will. Birdy is an amazing dog. She's just a tremendous hunter and a lot of drive. My other two dogs, Jenna and Ray, are very, very good, but I don't have the confidence in either of them that I have in Birdy. And as a hack trainer, you hunt the dog that you count on more versus giving the others experience. Well, about the middle of this year, I just made the decision that I was going to hunt the other two dogs more often and together, and try to build not necessarily their confidence, but my confidence in them. And Jenna, my youngest dog, who just turned 5, I tell you what, the second half of the season just really, she's always has had good skills and abilities and finds birds, but she just doesn't have the drive and maybe some of the skill that Birdie's had. And so the second half of the season, I hunted her alone more often. I paired her with Ray and left Birdie in the truck more often. And I'm just so excited with how well she's come along. The last day of the season here in Kansas, a couple Fridays ago on the 31st, we hunted down the southern southwest part of the state with a couple of friends, and to be able to shoot a limit of roosters and a limit of bobs on the final day of the season was amazing. But to have Jenna have come along so much in the last 60 days of the season was probably the highlight for me. Ray's doing great. Birdie's the number one dog I got, but to have Jenna come along was just a treat, and I'm already excited about next season for her. And frankly, I can't wait to see how she does in New Mexico at the end of this week.
Wow, that is so great to hear in a 5-year-old. We all hope for that in our 1-year-old. That the light bulb goes on and they figure things out. But I can't help but think that hunting her alone probably was the smartest move out of all of that. Did you think that your older dog, your 9-year-old rock star dog, had some sort of an influence over your youngest dog during the period they were hunting together?
Well, for sure, I am not a good dog trainer or a very good dog handler. I'm a hunter, and I've got dogs that are better than I deserve. And I don't want you or anybody that's listening to think that Jenna, it took her till she was 5 years old to become a dog. I mean, Jenna's a heck of a dog, and it's done great. I just didn't ever have the confidence in her that I did, Ray or Birdie the last couple of years. And the other part of it is she watches the other dogs so often that there'll be times that she watches or follows more than works on her own. So the effort that I took the last couple of the months really required her to do more on her own than normal. And as a result, even when she was with the other dogs, she was more independent. Yeah. And lots of dogs are more dependent on the others, even through their whole careers. So what was most encouraging for me was just to see some more independence in her, and absolutely whatever skills and abilities she has is not because of my training. It's the genetics and the natural ability that she has, and frankly, watching and working and following the other dogs. Yeah. Other dogs, from my standpoint, other dogs are the best trainers there are.
Yeah, I can't agree more. There are things that they'll teach that we'll never even think about. Absolutely, and there's a lot of value in that, no doubt about it. We're running short on time, Jim Millensifer, but I got to ask you, like I asked everybody in my newsletter a couple weeks ago. I gave them 3 choices in terms of how to describe their season. There was dismal, average, and epic. Where do you think your season ends up on that list?
It has been an epic season. I hunted as many days as I historically do, maybe even a few more. The number of birds that I harvested of each of the different species were terrific. We're blessed with lots of great protein in the freezer, and I've got tremendous memories, not only from a harvest standpoint, but also spending times with great friends in lots of different states. So it was an epic year, and I'm certainly blessed.
Well, good on you. I'm glad to hear that. Give everybody a little bit of food for thought as we look at the upcoming season. Jim Millensifer, I'll see you at Pheasant Fest. Until then, be safe. Enjoy New Mexico. Thanks for being a part of the Upland Nation podcast.
Thank you, Scott.
And you stick around because we've got a lot more to talk about. The Fix It segment is all about some kind of unique problems we have with our dogs in the winters that we work with all their entire lives. We'll have the word of the week and a prize from Pike Gear, those Dakota pants. And another guest, Steve Grossman will be joining us to debrief his bird season. It's all coming up on the Upland Nation podcast, brought to you by Trulock Chokes, Hey, sign up for their email list, and you'll get notifications on the sales and new products that are coming out. Those Chad Hodge upland chokes are now in stock. No matter what gauge you have, they've got something for you in there. And remember, there is a difference. When it comes to engineering, quality control, those are the things that make your pattern consistent. Yeah, I had somebody ask me a few days ago, can there be that much difference between the ones I got in there now? And I said, yeah, the ones you got in there now, if they came from, the manufacturer of your shotgun, that's not their priority. Their priority is selling you a shotgun, not a good set of choke tubes. So bear that in mind. Think about how you can add another bird to your bag, a few more birds to your season with TruLock chokes. Learn more about what I'm talking about at TruLockChokes.com, TruLock, TruLockChokes.com. Time for our Fur Feathers Friends Word of the Week, sponsored by Pointer Shotguns. And in fact, that is the grand prize. We'll be handing that away in June. A 4-pack of Pointer shotguns. Yeah, 4 matched Pointer shotguns in side-by-side or over and under, your choice. Go to furfeathersfriends.com and enter there. And while you're entering, you have a chance at a monthly prize. This month, it's Pike Gear Dakota pants, value $230. If you want one or the other of those, enter to win. You got to put the word of the week in if you want to win those Pike Gear Dakota pants. And this week, the word is sharptail. Appropriate for Jim and all you other fans of prairie grouse. Sharptail is the word of the week. FurFeathersFriends.com. Well, this guy's let's put it this way. He's forgotten more than we'll ever learn about bird hunting and bird dogs. Steve Grouseman Grossman joins me on the phone. Where are you these days, Steve?
Well, now I'm in South Dakota. I'm getting ready to get another new hip put in, so I'll beat the dog to the point. I've got 2 hips, and it'll be 2 hips and a knee. So all that time in the field, it wears on a person, but it could be way worse. So I'm still pretty fortunate.
Well, good luck on that. You're not the only one. In fact, the last hunt of the season I did was with a buddy who had a hip replacement, and he was out walking me. So,
yep.
But you've been there and done that already. You know that can happen. So good for you.
I'm excited to get it done.
Let's on a lighter note, as they say. Tell me a little bit about yourself and your background. Give everybody a kind of a more detailed acquaintance with your operation.
Well, I started in the business in 1979, managing Dakota Hunt Club in Grand Forks, North Dakota. And in 1984, we moved to a family farm and we started the Little Moran Hunt Club and Kennel. In 85, 86, I started doing a bunch of training and working pretty much exclusively for Burnt Creek setters at the time, Jim Marty out of Bismarck, North Dakota.
Yeah.
And so what we were doing is we were taking whole litters and keeping litters back, and then those dogs were already spoken for as a started dog, or in some cases a finished dog. And when I started Little Moran in 84, I had about 10 German Shorthairs, and they were great preserve dogs. But once I got back to the farm in Minnesota, we have a pretty good grouse population, rough grouse population on the farm, and they were just always had a tendency to crowd their birds just a tad bit much, and one step too many and the bird would go out. But when I started working with the setters from Burnt Creek English setters, that changed. And really then in 1987, we started our double gun bird hunts in the Grouse Lodge at Little Moran. So since 1987, I've been guiding rough grouse and woodcock hunts in Minnesota. And then in 2010, I was invited to be a guide and work with a new lodge out in western South Dakota, right near the river. and so much of my hunting out there had become all West River hunts with sharp-tail and prairie chicken. And so to this day, I'm still out there guiding prairie bird hunts with sharp-tail and prairie chicken in western South Dakota.
And of course, someday we'll actually run into each other out there. We pass like ships in the night. So many of my friends and I just wave as we're going in opposite directions somewhere, at least figuratively.
Isn't that the truth?
So here's my chance to get my fix and find out how the heck you're doing. How was your hunting season?
Last winter we had virtually no snow, both in South Dakota and back in Minnesota.
Yeah.
And in drumming counts for rough grouse and woodcock, they were posted midsummer that they had not been that high since 1972 in Minnesota. But unfortunately, we ended up having some pretty tumultuous rains during the time where either nests were flooded out or chicks were drowned out.
Yeah.
Came down with pneumonia. So we had an okay season, but we shot very, very few young birds.
Yeah.
The lion's share of all the birds we shot were old birds. And I think, some of these weird weather patterns we've been having, I think has made a difference too on our woodcock flights. With our woodcock, we could generally 5-10 years ago, we could almost set our watch by when woodcock were going to come through and migrate. But that's changed. So they trickle through now. Weather's nicer. They don't have one big push and come through. But our early season shooting woodcock or hunting woodcock in Minnesota has been the best. That first week, 10 days in October are our best woodcock shoots. And, we still have woodcock throughout the whole month of October, but we don't have the flights the way we used to. South Dakota was good. The same thing came into play, even though there was no snow. There was a big storm that came through midsummer with some pretty damaging hail from the Wyoming border right through to here in Huron where I'm at now. And so it did some damage on some of the prairie birds. We still had a good fall out west. We had a lot of young birds. We worked harder for them. The other thing we ended up having was a terrible drought late summer. So they had, where I'm working out of now, they were telling me that the first rain they had, or the rains they had in June, they were the rest of the summer without rain. Wow. And it really did hurt the damage. And it caused some issues with young dying off as well as fire issues. And we did have some fires when we were out there.
Wow. Talk about whatever the opposite of a perfect storm is. You've hit it on both, literally on both sides of the map there. Was there any upside to that South Dakota situation? I'm thinking about survival through a mild winter, but I guess none of that really matters if they're droughted out or they get bonked on the head by a hailstone.
Well, that's the key. And the interesting thing is all these years, they talk about a cycle in Minnesota, a 10-year growth cycle, but I don't see it. And the reason I don't is there's so many variables that come into play, and the weather is the big one. So, again, we had the highest drumming count since 1972, and then yet we had a terrible hatch. So there were no birds, no young birds. No, South Dakota, what we did have, it made it difficult because it was so dry, and we had terrible heat. Again, in the month of September while I was out there the whole month, we had many days where we would come in at noon, 1 o'clock, and the thermometer on the truck was reading 101, 102, wow. And the day was done at that point. But there was very little to no dew, so it was dry from the minute we got out at sunrise until it was dry. It was very dry.
Yeah. Well, out of all of that, which I'll classify as lowlights, were there any highlights for you and your clients and your other guides? I mean, did anybody come in with a great story? Maybe it was you, Steve.
they all did well, and we had good hunts. And the interesting thing is, both in Little Moran in Minnesota at the Grouse Lodge, for many people, our grouse hunts are a bucket list hunt.
Yeah, yeah.
And so they have the chance to come in, and on a positive side, we didn't have any snow falling down their necks toward the end of October. They had plenty of opportunities on birds. I think if there was a high side, is watching some of the young dogs that were young a year ago. Now they're into their second and third season, really started connecting and being able to handle birds and going looking for birds. And I think, when push comes to shove, that becomes the whole deal. When you have a dog that's taking you to birds and looking for birds for you, instead of just accidentally bumping into them because they're out there running and hunting. It's when you have the dog that is, digging and looking for birds in places where they should, swamp edges and different edges and clear cuts and things of that nature. So that was a positive. And the same with our South Dakota stuff. There are very few places anymore that prairie chicken can be shot. You've got Wyoming, perhaps, Nebraska,
yep.
and South Dakota. And, to see those guys have an opportunity and shoot a nice big prairie chicken, those are the highlights. Again, after all these years, it's not so much about taking the bird, it's about how the bird is taken, and to see people enjoy the sport and all of it offers.
You touched on something that I also touched on with my friend Jim Millensifer earlier in the podcast, and I just want an expert opinion on this. These young dogs that all of a sudden you see, finally they kind of get it. What gets them to the point where they get it? What do you do as a dog trainer to encourage dogs to figure it out?
Really, when push comes to shove, it's all wild birds. I get all my training done and all my scrimmage stuff, if you will, or the pregame or the kindergarten stuff on pigeons, and I prefer chucker versus other game birds to finish them off as far as a liberated bird goes. But those birds, they don't run, they don't play fair, they don't play as unfair as what a wild bird does. Mm-hmm. So when the young bird actually starts learning how to track and handle that running bird, they start thinking like a bird. And I think in other instances, when the time comes into play, I think is very true in the grouse woods, where dogs learn to smell birds in if I'm in a low bottom and I can smell rotting leaves, the dog does. So after a point in time, I think they start learning to attract other certain covers where they have found birds in the past. And then those dogs start searching for that. Or if they come across a swamp edge that's got a certain odor where they found birds in the past, they hunt that out different. And I think that's a big part of it is that, number one, they have to have wild birds. If, for example, I had a great client years ago who had a phenomenal English setter, and a friend of his got into the cloning business. This was years ago, and one day he called and said, "Steve, let's clone Lily." And, we thought about it, and because she was an incredible grouse dog, but really what push came to shove was that was 11 years earlier, so I'm 11 years older. The bird numbers weren't as good as they were when Lily was a young dog coming on. So during that time where she really became a great grouse dog, she was maybe having contact with 20, 30 grouse a day.
Sure.
And 10 or 11 years later, it may only been 10 grouse a day. So they don't have the opportunities to handle game birds to that degree, so they don't become as proficient. So I think that's a big key, is they need contact with a lot of wild birds in order to figure them out.
I can't agree more. And I tell 10 bird contacts in a day would be a great grouse day for somebody like me, but I understand completely what you're talking about. But the other thing that I'm intrigued with, what you said about dogs smelling productive covers. I'd never thought about that, but it makes all the sense in the world. And wherever you are, there are probably those kind. You've talked about grouse covers and swamp edges and rotting leaves. What about in the further west? Do your sharptail and hun hunts have certain places that smell more birdy?
There, I can't say that I could say that it smells different, but what I can tell you is when we're hunting some of our prairie birds in all these native pastures, there are plum thickets,
yes,
and there are destinations.
Yeah.
So if you were in the truck watching a flock of birds go into a pasture, they necessarily won't land right in a plum thicket, but they'll land close to it. Or winterberry, snowberry, they will land close to it, and then they walk into it. Especially we come to find out in the when it's so warm in the early season, they like that shade. So they will fly into those pastures and land close to those patches and then walk into the patches. Once the dogs learn to start finding, you will see them start to go from pocket to pocket just because they found birds there in the past.
Yeah.
A great example on that was years ago when we had the game farm. This has been in the early 90s. The local FFA went through the town of Staples, and they picked up all the Christmas trees at the beginning of the new year.
Yeah.
So we may have had a couple hundred Christmas trees out in our shooting fields, and it got to the point that was our only cover.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we would plant birds in those Christmas trees. And the thing you would first thing after 2 or 3 times in the field, the dogs would just run from Christmas tree to Christmas tree and not hunt anything else.
Yep. Yeah.
So all of a sudden that becomes a visual. And I don't think it's the same, in some ways there might be a change, that golden hour of the afternoon, mm-hmm, where all of a sudden you're in a low spot and you can feel the temperature change.
Yes.
I think in some instances, dogs pick up on some of those as well. They pick up on far more than we can ever figure out.
Oh, no doubt about it. And of course, in the field trial world, they want a dog that will race from objective to objective, however you define that.
Yep.
And you're absolutely right. I've seen that happen. And you mentioned the Christmas tree version of what I'm going to tell you, which is, if you train your dog in the same field all the time and you plant your birds in the same spot, or you use bird launchers and put them in the same spot all the time, that's the same situation. The dog goes right for that and then pretends to point, because they don't even need to get a whiff of the bird then. They just know. And they have
that. They become very cautious in some of those areas.
Yeah, in fact, I've played a game on Flick a few times just to addle him a little bit and not put birds there. He knows there's birds out there, so he goes to the first spot, and there's nothing there. So now he's got to start working again, and I love to play that game with him. Well,
absolutely.
How about yourself personally? Is there anything that you did or that was done to you by Mother Nature or anything else, maybe by a dog that really kind of will stay in your mind through the off season?
I guess if anything about, there's a saying that a man doesn't make the dog makes a man.
Yeah.
And I so agree with that. God gave these animals natural ability, and some of them have more natural ability and some of them have less. I guess if there's anything, the dogs have taught me to be more patient and let nature come on its own. I can only do so much. And if I push the dog too much or expect too much of him as a youngster, then I end up causing issues that the dog will remind. Here's a good example about that. Years ago, when I was training all breeds, a guy had brought me a very nice little yellow lab. And the dog was a phenomenal dog, but the dog would not leave a duck boat. He wanted to, but he wouldn't. So we were talking about it one day, and it dawned on him. He said, I bet this, he said, it was the opening of the fishing season in Minnesota, which is early May. Water's cold, water was rough, and he had his pup with him in the bow of the boat, and the pup was standing on the seat, and a big wave came in, and the pup fell out of the boat. So he had to, he rescued the dog with a landing net, the young dog.
Uh-huh.
And so the dog had that kind of a memory about being in a boat, and it was a bad experience.
Wow.
So what we did is we just put a little place board so the dog could just slowly step out of the boat into the water. So there was not a drop off from the gunwale of the boat to the water.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And in fact, it's funny. I got a corgi story like that. When they don't know how deep it is, they think it's really deep, and you find that experience. They go they submerge, and that's your first try. No, thank you. We don't want that. So
look, over all these years, there were a lot of dogs that I wish I had back. I put too much pressure on at an early age.
Yeah.
And it wasn't so much that they created a blinker, and that's easily done in putting too much pressure on that young dog around birds, but it set me back so far that I end up having to almost in some ways let the dog go through a urging period.
Yeah.
Learning to chase and have fun with birds again, and then be very cautious when I brought him back into birds and trying to solidify his point and create some steadiness. So I think to answer your question, is that they have taught me patience, and they've taught me to not overhandle the dog.
Yeah.
The dog's got the nose out there in the field, which I don't have, and there's no reason for me to overhandle the dog unless I see a bird fly into a thicket, or those are differences. But to overhandle the dog, telling them where I would think the bird should be, I let them hunt. So, and I guess in a big way, less is more. And guys that'll hunt with me, they said, how come you don't talk to your dog? It's like, he knows more than I do. I'm just following him. I drove him here. I'm his chauffeur.
In recent weeks, I've been reminded of that in many, many ways by other pros like you. And then also a couple nights ago, somebody reminded me of something I used to open one of my TV series many years ago. I reminded everybody every week to follow the hunter with the longest nose.
Yeah.
Usually it's a dog, but it's so true. We have to learn that over and over again. Have you caught yourself at all in any particular situations where you've actually kind of slapped your forehead and said, oh, dang, I shouldn't have done that?
Oh, God. More in training, because when I was training, and I was very fortunate. I had a couple of very good mentors along the way. Bob West was one of my mentors, and I worked with Bob for a number of years. And the other one was Jim Marty. Yeah. And the thing that Jim would do is when I was 24, 25, when we started the hunt club in Minnesota, he would come over for a week, 10 days, and ride horse and watch me train.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, we would sit and we would have a pot of coffee, and sometimes it was 2 pots of coffee because there was a lot to discuss. And he had these notes on the individual dogs that we did, and it was, why did you do this? Why did you do that? And to have someone like that with that kind of knowledge sit back and be another set of eyes from a different perspective taught me more than, it was incredible. And it made me think different. It made me think about how I approach situations. So those, kind of V8 moments where, geez, you said, I wish I wouldn't have done that. Those happen for the most part in all the dog training situations that I was in. Once I'm starting in the field and I'm guiding, seldom do we have those issues because the dogs are, in some ways, in most ways, they're still an animal, but they are really pretty consistent. One of an interesting deal, Mike Gaddis from Sporting Classics magazine, he wrote it was a long article about the all-time greats of Little Moran.
Oh, wow.
And what it was, what are the 5 greatest grouse dogs you had at Little Moran, and what made them so great?
Uh-huh.
And the thing that made those dogs so great is that they were so consistent day in and day out over many, many years. It's no different than a very loyal employee that you give the farm to. And those dogs were so consistent, and they seldom made mistakes. And, and I'm totally aware of being kennel blind and all those things that come into play, but I've got it all recorded, what the dogs did on our hunts. And so, it's, let the dogs, once they know their stuff and once they've been educated, then Mother Nature takes over, and I just follow them through the field.
Well, there you have it. And Steve Grossman, we could go on. So it would take 3 pots of coffee to finish this discussion. We'll do it again. But in the meanwhile, I'm taking away from this already some great information, and I'm sure others will as well. Glad to have you getting back on your feet, so to speak, very soon from a physical standpoint. And you gotta rate your season just like everybody else. There are 3 choices, and we're just keeping a poll going. I've asked everybody on the newsletter, and here's your chance. Your season was either an epic, one for the record books, average, nothing to write home about, or dismal, and can't wait for next season's opener. How would you describe your season, Steve?
I would rate it as moderate. Yeah, it was good. We've had better, but I've had worse as well.
Yeah, and I'm looking at that. I'm looking at average as could have been a lot worse. You're absolutely right. Well, good for you.
Yep. So on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd rate it about a 7+.
Well, that's good to hear. I'm glad to hear it, and good to talk with you again. Thanks so much for being a part of the Upland Nation podcast.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate it.
Good luck. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And the rest of you, we've still got the Fix It segment coming up in just a moment. We're going to talk about kind of the interesting observation I made about this time of year and how it affects our dogs and what we can do about that. So stick around for that. After this word from midwayusa.com, just placed another order with them. Yeah, well, this time of year, well, yeah, okay, a little fishing stuff, a new pair of boots, got to get them broke in. Maybe you ought to be there too. And just a little bit of everything. And I think that's what I would leave you with this time around. There is so much variety at midwayusa.com. If you need it, they probably got it. Just go to the top, type into the search bar what you're looking for. I bet you find it there. And remember, if you sign up for emails or text messaging, you get 10% off your next order. Customer satisfaction and engagement is their number one goal at midwayusa.com. Got an email from a good friend of mine not a couple days ago. Hunted a lot with him this year. And he said, "Is this the high-vis sight that you had on your shotguns?" And I said, "Yes, it is. All you got to do is measure the width of the rib, order that, snap it right on with a magnetic attachment, and you're good to go." So it must be working if my friend who always outshoots me is asking me for, essentially, shooting advice. And it's absolutely true. If you're looking to improve your shooting, one way to do it is to get your head, your eye, and the rest of your mind's eye on the birds in relation to the muzzle. That's what a high-vis sight will do for you. Watch the video at hivizsights.com. You'll see what I mean. That's HIVIZ sights.com. Well, winter finally showed up. Boy, did it. We're dealing with, almost a foot of what on alternate days is beautiful dry powder, and then it freezes, and then it becomes yucky and muddy, and then it becomes hard and icy. All of those things will have an effect on your dog's pads. And so let's fix that as best we can this time of year. I know It's hard to think about pad health during the off season, but it's critical that you do. You're training this time of year. Your dog still needs exercise. If he's immobilized, injured, unhappy, in pain, nobody's having a good time. Check your dog's pads regularly, even this time of year. I've found personally, with Flick at least, and my other dogs in the past, snow and rain actually dry out a dog's pads. Don't ask me for the physics on that. But it seems like if I'm not careful about it, he'll come up to me, and yes, I do. I let him put his paws on my chest. When I've been out of town for a day or two, he comes up and gives me a dog hug. And so I feel those pads right there. They're scratchy. They're checked, if you will. So I try to do one thing regularly, even in the off season. You have your own regimen. If it works for you, just don't neglect it during the off season. I use a human heel cream, foot cream, specifically for cracked heels. It's called, what is it called? Pro Foot. And it does the job for Flick. I just apply that liberally on any bare pad skin every couple days. Yeah, get it in between the pads, get it on the edges, get it everywhere. Don't be cheap about it. And that somehow keeps those pads a little bit more supple, a little less dried out. For what it's worth, it works for me. Hope it works for you. Take care of your dog's pads all season. That's the Fix It segment. Brought to you by PointerShotguns.com. Did you see the review? There was a great review in one of the magazines by our friend Brad Fitzpatrick, who has been on the program a couple times. He took a look at some of the best new semi-automatic shotguns coming out this year from the SHOT Show. Yeah, Pointer's FT12 semi-auto is on that list. It's a new design in a semi-automatic shotgun, new to Pointer. Versatile, he calls it. Reliable and affordable. Got some great design features in there, from a rotating bolt for faster follow-up shots and reduced recoil. So go to PointerShotguns.com, look at the new semi-autos under the FT12 designation, PointerShotguns.com. Learn more, pick out your color, your Cerakote, or whatever else you're looking for in the way of options. And it starts at under $4.99. Well, that'll do it for today. Thanks to Jim Millensifer and Steve Grossman for being part of the Upland Nation podcast. Thank you for listening, of course. Thank you again if you tell one person about the podcast. If you comment at the social platforms, I appreciate that. I read them all. I don't use them all on the podcast, or we'd be here till next week. If you leave a rating or a review, all the better. Thank you to our sponsors, Purina Pro Plan Sport Dog Food, Mid-Valley Clays and Shooting School, Trulock Choke Tubes, MidwayUSA.com, Pointer Shotguns, and High Viz Shooting Systems. New stuff at FindBirdHuntingSpots.com. Take a look. Maybe you learned something. Tell a friend. I'm Scott Linden. Thanks again for listening to the Upland Nation podcast.